Media Utah. This is Talk with John. I am your host, John. Tuesdays, typically from 4 to 6 p.m. Last week I missed it because I had some things I had to take care of. But typically for Tuesdays from 4 to 6 p.m., you can join me right here on Main Street Media Utah. Also, I do a rodeo show on K Talk Radio. That's 11. I almost said, yeah, no. It's AM radio 1640 on the AM dial in Salt Lake County. There are also other ways that you can reach out. It's ktalkmedia.com. There's ways to listen to it live as well. But I now have I'm going to be, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to Main Street Media. You can watch this on X, on kmmu.org or kmmu.com, which is our website. Also on X, on our account on X, we've got an account on YouTube and an account on Rumble. So you can go to any one of those platforms to view us. I just want to say thank you for joining me here today, and I look forward to introducing my guest. But before we do that, I want to give out my show prayer and my show mantra. Now, remember, it's the prayer of my heart, and the mantra is I don't live up to this, I don't achieve this, but it's when it comes to doing my show, it's what I hope to achieve. I hope my show is a gift back to my forefathers, the founding fathers, and may it be an acceptable token to our Father above. That's the prayer of my heart when it comes to doing this show. And then the show mantra is, where there is liberty, there is the Spirit of Christ. Where the Spirit of Christ is, there will be liberty. And the greater the Spirit of Christ, the greater liberty will be. That's taken from 2 Corinthians, also from Article 7 of the Constitution and other places throughout Scripture. But right now, I have joining me the great Austin Hepworth. Austin Hepworth is an attorney at law. He is a practicing attorney here in the state of Utah and also happens to be running for the Attorney General for the state of Utah. And I've asked him to come on and join us because I want to let the audience know about him. As the audience knows, I had on several of the candidates running for the Republican Party for Attorney General joined me, and I interviewed them. And now I am bringing an excellent choice for Attorney General, Austin Hepworth, on. And Austin, I want to say thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, it's great to be here, John. Thanks so much for having me. It's always good to be with you.
It's good to have you here. I've been meaning to ask you this question, and I probably should have told you I was going to ask you this off air. But I am curious to know what your thoughts are, because I've asked, I talked to Trent Christensen, I talked to Frank Mylar, and this is about the question of whether it was a bribe or not that happened between Trent Christensen and Frank Mylar. And I've asked a few attorneys that are friends of mine what their thoughts were on it. And since you are running for office, now I know that neither one of them now are in the running. Well, yeah, at the moment, neither one of them are running. In the running, I don't think Frank is going to be able to do anything that he can to wind up achieving being on the ballot. And Derek Brown will be I believe, the nominee for the Republicans. But I want your thoughts on whether you think that was something that needed to be reported, or if that's something that you don't feel that needed to be reported.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of whether it should be reported or not, I think the way to look at it potentially is from the flip side of, well, what if he didn't report and someone found out about it later? It would have been a really tough spot to be in. Attorneys are generally supposed to report misconduct or ethical violations for other attorneys, because attorneys often work with other attorneys in more private situations. You're working with people. And when you become aware of misconduct, there are generally ethical obligations to report that misconduct. So if there is misconduct and you don't report it, and someone finds out later, you can actually be the one that gets in trouble, along with the attorney committing misconduct. And so I think that for any person in a spot like that, where there are texts or something that may look like you were complicit in something, or may look like you were just waiting to see what happened. It could look bad unless you do something. And so I know that there is some frustration about whether or not it should have been reported. But I say, look, you're talking about attorneys here. You're talking about the law. This is the attorney general position. And the law gets people in trouble quite often who sit around and don't do things. Where as a society, we're becoming less tolerant of those who don't take steps and actively report. And so I think it's a very tough spot to be in. And I think that it is often necessary to then do what's expected and follow the law in those regards, and report those types of things if they come in. It's up to the law to determine whether there was intent behind it, whether it was a violation of the law or not. And I think that that was something that Trent did do, is send it up the chain, knowing that, hey, we can't just sit here, because then it looks like I'm sitting around waiting for a job potentially. And I think that the only way to stay clean and clear of any allegation of misconduct is to report that.
His other point was one of the things whether it was a bribe or not, whether I felt that it was a bribe or not. Um, Speaking with Trent, he was like, I've run a campaign that my number one issue was transparency.
Yeah.
And my number one issue was, hey, I was going to have voter transparency and an anti-corruption campaign. And he was like, I talked to a few of my supporters, and they were like, well, the problem is you've made that claim. How much are you going to live behind it?
Yeah.
And so I can totally appreciate where he was coming from and why he chose to do it. I also understand other people's frustrations on why he did do it. I do understand that. But it was a call that was made, and I understand why that call was made. But I just wanted your thoughts. Okay. So, Austin, we live in the state of Utah, and you announced yourself. You got, I believe, some signatures were collected, and you were able to wind up running as an independent. Are you still an independent running for attorney general, or have you joined with another group?
I am still independent. I have been invited to join with other parties. But one of my, kind of staying true, like Trent was talking about, staying true to the campaign side of things, one of the things I believe strongly is that the AG should be independent and shouldn't be controlled by parties or groups. I think that's where the root of a lot of our problems come from. And just like in sports, if you have the Jazz versus the Lakers and the Lakers get to pick the refs, I think most people would understand that's not fair, and it fundamentally changes the nature of the game. And in politics, I think that we need to really start thinking about, why do we elect members of a party to police or govern a party? Same with the state auditor. Why do we have a Republican auditor, Republican? Those are two positions that, from an independent standpoint, if they're independent and can be outside politics and just focus more on what the law is, I believe that the system, everything operates much cleaner. I believe we get better information, better results. And ultimately, I believe that the rules then are followed. We lose the concern associated with favoritism with other things if there's not a group behind those two positions. So I have stayed independent because, to me, it's similar to sports. We should have independent referees. We should have independent auditors, just like Wall Street does. And that's a message that I think could really help clean up Utah in a lot of ways.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Do you, well, let me pose this to you, kind of the counterpoint that comes from me as being a Republican. Now, here's the situation. Austin is one person that this does not fit. but with a lot of the offices that are held, like state school board and so forth, school board positions, I wind up finding that they are held by very moderate, if not either rhino Republicans, very moderate Republicans, or people that are Democrats. When they and that's the counter for uh, using the party system. One of the things about Austin Hepworth is I don't consider him a rhino in any way, shape, or form. I actually consider him very, very conservative. But so that's would have been one of the concerns that I have in general, just when we have a non-party system. Now, obviously, here in the state of Utah, bottom line is we have a lot of Democrats that actually have an R by their name, are actually Republicans, as opposed to, or at least have affiliated with the party of Republicans. I'm going to say Becky Edwards is a clear individual that fits that, who is very Democrat by nature, but yet considers herself a Republican. So, what would you? What are your thoughts on what I had to say? That's a concern that some of my listeners and some of the people that I've interacted with have, with that perspective of, hey, we should have this office be independent.
Yeah, and I think it's a great question and a great concern. I actually don't believe that the office should be nonpartisan. I believe that any party should be allowed to put forth a candidate for the office. I actually believe that as people, as voters, we should be very aware of how we can utilize different parties or different interests or independents from those parties to provide checks and balances on the government. So, for example, in states where one party doesn't control everything, it may make sense to have a certain party have an attorney general that's of a certain party. The auditor could potentially do a great job if they're from a minority party or a third party. When I talk about independence, I'm talking about independence from those in control, particularly. And I think as voters, if we're going through and saying, I want this party to do this and this party to do this, we can be aware that we need to select some interests that can provide a check and balance at times. And I believe it's incumbent on the voters. To me, when we talk about rhinos, interesting because we have the issue with nonpartisan offices. When we elect nonpartisan offices, we don't always know where people stand on issues. But when we elect partisan offices, we don't always know where people stand on issues. And we get we can get quite the surprises quite often. But one of the things I found too is that we as voters often just accept what people say, or we go along with their little sound bites they give us. A lot of candidates' websites, there's not a lot of information. There really isn't. And how do you decide who to vote for and who not to vote for? And one of the things that I say, as well as the people, we can send a very clear signal to people. Just say, hey, your website's pathetic or it lacks a lot of info. I won't vote for you unless you really detail out some answers here, put some real things in. And that's something that, again, we as a people can take on. I don't think it's the government's job to provide that answer for us. I believe that as we watch politics ebb and flow, there may come a time to have a certain party in the AG's office or certain independents in the AG's office. So I'm a big proponent of leaving it a partisan race, allowing people to self-declare. That it at least sets some level of expectation for what they're to do if they self-declare for people. But to really then delve into, but what is it that's going to help Utah the most at this moment? And have that be a question that every voter asks. I'm a big fan of educating voters to say, let's look at what's a real promise, what's not. Let's look at what can really make a difference this election versus what can't, and that may change. And so I'm not pushing for nonpartisan. Just that with where we've been, we've watched three attorney generals leave office under questionable color, a lot of clouds hanging over them as they leave. And the AG's office is one of the least transparent. It touches almost everything that the government does. And to me, if we want to clean that up, if we want to say, hey, we want transparency, we want accountability, we want the law to be enforced, we want government officials to be subject to the law and not be above the law, I don't believe that's going to happen in our current political climate of another Republican to do that. Now, again, in the future, that could be different. I don't pretend like it's not. So I'm not establishing a hard and fast rule forever. The independence thing is really from the governing party, or even the two maybe at play, to say, where we look at it and say, what do we need to do as a people to get the best results? How do we keep our government leaders accountable? How do we keep checks and balances in place? And that will change over time, even with the Supreme Court, the Utah Supreme Court's decision recently on the gerrymandering and the redistricting, saying that the Utah legislature looks like they may kick out these boundaries the Utah legislature picked. That could change offices. There's been a lot of movement in Utah, people leaving, people coming, and politics may look different in a few years. We don't know what that will be. But I'm a big proponent, to your point, of having the concern about what people really are. I'm a big proponent of making people actually answer questions and not supporting them if they don't. Let them put up real things, real answers. And that's something that I believe we should be demanding of every candidate.
What is something? What do you want to do? So for those of you in the audience, I've gone through the list of roughly 23 questions. I've asked Austin that already. I only have Austin until 5 o'clock, so we're not going to go through all of those, but I am going to reference a few of those. So you're running for office. There is not going to be someone there. But what made you decide, I want to run for office? Typically, when someone runs for office, they want to affect change in certain ways, and they don't like the person that's there. Well, that's not an issue for you, because Sean Reyes is not going to be staying on board. You referenced a few of let's see, Sean Reyes that stepped down. I'm trying to think of the two.
John Swallow and Mark Shurtleff.
Mark Shurtleff and John Swallow, there were two issues with them on their way out as well. So my question for you is, what do you want to affect? What do you want to do differently? What do you feel has not been done well? And what would you like to do when you get into this office?
Yeah, I think
into Attorney General.
Yes. So one is I talk about often is the checks and balances side, where I do believe that many government officials have had a very lax level of enforcement. For example, we've had school boards that knowingly, willingly lock parents out of public meetings. It's a criminal offense under Utah law.
Which happened at in Austin. This happened in Alpine School District. For my audience, I've referenced this before. In fact, I even asked both AGs what they would do. So should that happen? In fact, I was a state delegate, and I asked all of them that were running for it. So they locked someone out. So what would you do if they locked people out of a public meeting? How would you handle that?
I would bring charges based on the law. To me, the law is written, and the AG's job is to enforce the law. I don't believe the AG's job is to play politics or to go through things. It's to enforce the law.
Okay, so the counter to me was from Rachel, I forget her last name, that was running
Rachel Terry.
Rachel Terry, and also Derek Brown. Both of them said, well, Alpine School District is one of my clients. How do you
kind
how
of.
do you handle that scenario?
So the Attorney General's office certainly advises government officials, but the Attorney General's office is also the one responsible for enforcing the law, and you aren't. And so, for example, the AG should be bringing charges against government officials. To me, the advising on the law is a part of what the AG does, but the AG's main job is to enforce the law. That's why they advise Utah on what the law is. And I think what's happened in politics quite often with the AG's office is that the Attorney General has started to view their main priority as being the attorney that advises the state and it's like, oh, you committed a crime. Well, we're not going to really do anything. We'll be your attorney, kind of like in private practice, help you try and sweep it under the rug, whatever. But to me, that actually goes against what the Attorney General should be doing. The Attorney General's first and foremost job is to enforce the law. And they can bring charges. And if they have to say, look, we can't represent you because we need to bring charges, or they need to appoint someone independent, or have a prosecuting unit that's independent or whatever, there's mechanisms to make that work. And those are mechanisms that are sorely needed. And if we don't aggressively look at that and take that on, then there's no accountability. Who's going to bring charges when it's the state's job to enforce the law? And there's a law for public officials, and the attorneys go, oh, sorry, it's a conflict of interest because I advise them on the law too. Yeah, the reason you advise them on the law is because your main duty is to enforce the law for the state. If they break it, they should be subject to charges. They should know that your office isn't going to stand behind them when they're breaking the law. And I don't feel that there's any conflict that can't be overcome in that scenario. But I do believe the AG's office has operated at a very low level of just acting as a private attorney for these offices, and then they don't take adverse positions against them, which in my mind is one reason why we have so many problems. Why people, I was looking at a poll and they were showing the level of trust in government. I think in 1964, 77% of America trusted that government officials had their best interests in mind. It's now down to 20%.
Yeah,
And
that's why it's not.
when you have an attorney general's office whose job is to enforce the law and prosecute and hold officials accountable, and they just back down from it and say, I advise them on the law too, we can't figure it out. I guess good luck. We don't know who's going to enforce that law. People instantly go, something's wrong. They may not know all the ins and outs of government and the workings of it, but they instantly say something's wrong, and they lose trust. And as they lose trust, they start to resort to their own powers, their own kind of like, what can I do? And they start to look outside the government for answers, or they turn to people who promise very intense type solutions. And neither one's great, but to me, our nation is one that was fundamentally built as a rule of law. We went from the rule of kings to the rule of law, which means that once a law is passed, it has to be respected, it has to be enforced. And I believe strongly that our AG has really lost sight of that. When I say our AG, talking about the office, it's lost sight of that. It views itself as representing these various departments of Utah, and it completely forgets that its job is to create and uphold the rule of law. So yes, we tell the agencies, this is the law, follow it, but we also prosecute if they don't. And I believe with that, one of the major areas that the AG's office has not lived up to its potential. And now, granted, this isn't a stated requirement, but to me, it's very strong and very important to understand as a basis for liberty that this is a power the AG's office has. The AG has 500, 600 attorneys, something like that in it. There's a lot of very intelligent people. They know the laws of Utah, and they keep that in their minds, and they talk to some government officials about it. But why, I say, is the AG not Utah's chief legal educator? it should be openly working to educate Utahns on what the law is. I believe very strongly that if we're going to have liberty in our country, you have to have access to the law. You have to have the ability to understand the law. And the government says, yeah, we're going to pay and we're going to give money to the AG's office so that we understand the law, so that we can do things. But we cut the rest of Utah out of it. And as a citizen, you have to go pay to have an attorney tell you what the law is. If you have disputes, if you have constitutional issues, it costs a whole lot of money to get those resolved. And most people can't afford attorneys. We've created a system that has cut most people out of having real access to the law. Now, AI technology, it's helping to start to bridge that gap some, but and AI does some things great. You can create certain documents, you can form your business with AI. It does great. You can get a will or trust sometimes. In some situations, it can do a great job. But if you have a real legal question and you need some real answers, or you have a legal dispute, it's a lot harder. If you were one of the parents locked out of the Alpine School District meeting and you have no recourse, AI doesn't help. All these things don't help. You have to pay to get an attorney to try and do something. And so I look at it and say, the AG should recognize that it represents Utah. Utah is more than the government agencies, it's the people too. And I believe very strongly that the AG should be actively working to gather the information known from those that know the law, those that help administer it, those that help prosecute and enforce it. And they should actively seek to put that information out to let Utah know what the laws are, what impact they're having. Another big area of transparency I would love to promote in the AG's office is to say, who benefits from these laws? Who do these laws hurt? Let's start showing what the law is. Let's start talking about the winners, the losers. And it's just a matter of fact. We're just putting out facts. We're just saying when they come out and put in this requirement, it either hurts this type of person or business and it helps this type. Because when you start to get that information and you start to look at those things, we can start to draw dots as people. Citizens can start to look at campaign finance disclosures. They can start to look at lobbying. They can start to connect dots to say, oh, look at this. Here's the winners and losers associated with these laws. Here's the impact these laws are having. I had no idea that these laws have this type of impact. Just as an example of a really simple, kind of silly example, if you ask people why car washes have free vacuums, it's because, and maybe it's turned into a marketing need now because all the car washes do it, and so maybe you have to do it just to be competitive. But Utah says car washes don't have to collect and they don't have to charge and collect and remit sales tax if their vacuums are free. If they charge for vacuums, they have to collect sales tax on the car wash. That's a pain for a business. That's a obligation. They don't want to do it. And so they start out with this free car wash thing. And now everywhere you go in Utah, they advertise free vacuums. Sorry, I said free car wash, free vacuums. That's something where the law is having impact. It's doing something. Is it a good law or a bad law? Should they, should sales tax be based on something like that or not? If people know those types of things, again, they can start to look and say, well, who lobbied for this? Who is behind it? And start to connect dots. Who are the winners and the losers? Who does this benefit? And I think that law is often one of the things I've learned from being involved with the legislature is there's hundreds of laws that come up every year. Almost every one of those wasn't just thought of by a congressman or someone in the legislature. There's a group or a person that came to them and said, we want this. They have something they want to achieve as a result. Maybe some of their motives are pure. There's some great groups and great people. Maybe some of them aren't pure. Maybe they are very selfish, motivated. But either way, people win and lose. And the laws become so complex and it touches so many areas that I believe it's incumbent on us to start to say, let's start to unpack it. Let's start to put information out there that helps people sort through it, understand the impact, understand the issues. And can we talk about it in a non-political way? Can we be honest about it and just say, here's what it does. You get to decide if it's good or bad. That's what attorneys are supposed to do. Attorneys are supposed to just tell their clients, here's what the law is. And the Attorney General in Utah, I don't believe, has been focused at all on Utah citizens. Granted, it can't tell them everything. There is some level of attorney-client privilege with the state. There is some level of having to have this confidential relationship with the state. But when it comes to explaining what the law is, when it comes to explaining the winners and the losers, the impact, those are things that I believe can very much be disclosed and should be disclosed to those in Utah for the Attorney General to fully do their job. Now, granted, there's not any agency or group that holds the Attorney General accountable for that. And so I think the office has mainly just got into this rut of we just focus on Utah agencies and that's it. And I believe that it's damaging our liberty. It's hurting the strength of I don't fully know what you call it, but if you look at, if you had the strength index for liberty where it's at, it really impacts it. It lowers it when individual citizens cannot access the law.
What are some other things that so kind of the problem that I had with the way, especially Derek Brown and Terry answered that question, it was like, I think your responsibility, any elected office, their number one responsibility should be to the public.
I agree.
Whether that be a legislator, whether that be the state auditor, whether that be the governor, AG. The first group that it's to is not even necessarily, in my opinion, to the state. It's to the individual citizens. That should be the first responsibility in my mind, and that's one of the reasons why I, frankly, had such a big issue with what they said.
Yeah, and I agree completely. And I believe fundamentally, I haven't seen where the people are even on the radar with the Utah Attorney General's office.
Would you disagree with this opinion that they seem to come in last? I mean, it's like the city or the state, the cities, the legislature as a whole, even the legislators. The last people to come in seem to be the last ones that come in is the people.
Yes, I think the people are very much the bottom of the priority. I don't even know if they're on the priority list for the Attorney General's office.
You brought up the example of the AG, or excuse me, of the Alpine School Board. Is there anything else? You said you'd like to share bills. Hey, this bill, this is how it's going to affect. This is who's the winner. This who's the loser on the bill. Any other areas that you want to affect?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big areas is that, well, there's a couple. One of the things that happens, attorney, anyways, in private practice, that focuses on constitutional work. I do get calls from people who have had various constitutional rights violated or who at least have a case to argue that they were violated. And very few people can actually take that all the way and make something of it. It's not easy. And the court system has really, it's become very burdensome. It's become very complex. And one of the things that I would love to do as an attorney general is to have more accessibility for the public, for the people to come in and get some feedback. So they can come in and say, hey, I felt my constitutional rights were violated. I was told I had to leave this place. I couldn't hold my signs there picketing. And I think my freedom of speech was violated. I believe that people are entitled to an honest look at that. If we elect an AG and our taxes are paying for hundreds of attorneys, we should have a chance to get in and raise the issue. And I think to get a fair assessment back from the AG's office to say, yeah, we know you felt your rights were violated, but here's actually a case law where the Supreme Court said they can do that. So sorry, we can't do much. Or to say, hey, it looks like there's some real issues. We're now going to go talk to these government officials and see if there can be a resolution to these issues. And to me, what needs to happen is there needs to be mechanisms in place where individuals can get some type of help or relief. It may not be the full thing that a court could grant, but some ability to get some relief or some ability to talk through an issue. If they're trying to be outside protesting and they feel they have the right to, and the college is kicking them off, for example, that's one of the things that's come up where colleges remove people who have signs or who are passing out different flyers. I believe very strongly there should be a mechanism for those people to get redress, at least some level of redress, some ability to know, well, where does the Attorney General stand on this? Because one of the things I feel strongly about is that we shouldn't have to guess at whether or not the chief prosecutor in the state, we shouldn't have to guess at how the chief prosecutor interprets a law. I should believe we should be disclosing those things, saying, look, this is how we interpret this. This is what we enforce. To me, that's kind of what due process is to say, this is who we are. This is to put this information out and not just sit on it, but to give clear guidance, to take a stand on those types of things. So I would love to have more accessibility for people, some mechanisms in place. I know some other candidates have talked about similar type things to have, hours where citizens can come in and meet with attorneys in the office or different things. And so I do hope that as a result of this election, a result of enough discussion on it, that actually does happen. I'm hoping that people will push that enough to say, no, we need a voice. We need the ability to meet.
I could see that legislature led by Governor Cox trying to limit the ability of the Attorney General's office to do that, possibly even by like cutting positions, cutting back on the funds of the state Attorney General's office. Should that happen, I could see them playing a dirty game. Now, bottom line is let's put them in a bad spot. So if they do it, let's put it in a bad spot. But I love the sound of that. That the average everyday citizen can come in and meet with someone from the AG's office and plead their case of why they feel they need to have help from the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, it's something that that I feel every citizen should have some level of access to. Again, that doesn't mean today you get it immediately, or there's, I'm not saying there's a 24-hour hotline or something, but there needs to be some mechanism for it. And to your point, the legislature and the governor, they do have some checks and balances on the AG, as in they approve the funding for it. So it is possible that the legislature, the governor, cuts off funding. But in that situation, I say, well, we'll just stop serving the government officials. And we may, if attorneys get cut out, if different things happen, it's like, well, what are you going to do now? You don't know what the law is, and we'll prosecute you for it. And even on the side of meeting with people, helping to intake different things, there are some budget constraints. We don't want to just run taxes through the roof with things. There needs to be a balance to it. But a big part of it is there's a whole side to internships, to helping educate upcoming lawyers. We have BYU and Utah law schools. And I believe very strongly there's some strong potential there to say, let's bring in students, let's let them meet with people, talk to people. They can package things up. They can do some initial research. They can learn a lot from it, gain a lot of great experience that can help them get better jobs and things after. And I don't believe that everything has to cost money necessarily. Some of it may be simply just increasing the efficiency at which we do some things in the office. I don't know for sure. I don't work in the AG's office. I know they stay very busy. There's a lot of demands on them. But I do know it's not uncommon for government to not be the best at managing efficiency. And I think that those are some things we should look at to say, well, are we doing things that aren't fully necessary or fully efficient, looking to ways to, trim our own belt, say, can we be responsible for people's funds and not just demand more money for everything? But also, I think, be honest to say, hey, Utah, we'd love to enforce these laws. If we could go out and enforce these laws that have been passed and these laws that have been passed, it could do a lot of good for Utah, but we simply don't have the funding. So here's the information again, the transparency. Go talk to your reps, go talk to the governor. If they push back, we can be very vocal and transparent about that as well, and let people know that the government's pushing back on certain things.
So one of
because they can't make every
things
decision.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying, ultimately, the AG can't make every decision. There are, again, like you say, those checks and balances. But we can certainly be transparent about what's happening and let Utah know what's happening, and be very watchful of that. And I think it's very, very good thing to do, to say, do we want to live in a state where we don't prioritize enforcement of the law? Because what happens when we don't, the whole system starts to break down. We lose trust, we lose respect, we lose the ability to function together. And America's great because it is a country that's ruled based on law, not on any one person.
So there's a couple things I want to touch base on real quick before we've got probably about 11 minutes before you need to go. A couple points that I want to touch base on. What are your thoughts on the governor or the attorney general being underneath the governor? I think pretty much you've already stated what your thoughts are on that. But there's a couple things that have citizens concerned that have been raised up. One of those is illegal aliens coming into the state. Is there anything that you can do as the AG? Also, the overreach of the federal government into our lives. We had a citizen in Provo recently shot by the FBI, and the FBI was the one that did the investigation. So, a big concern of many of my listeners is the overreach of the federal government in the state of Utah. What are your thoughts on those two things?
Yeah, so I think both are very important things to talk about. Overreach of federal government, it's been interesting to watch. I think almost every AG candidate talks about fighting government overreach, federal government overreach, in some form or another. And a lot of that comes down to federal lands, BLM type management. But it's been fascinating. I've been working on, and we're about to file a constitutional challenge to the Corporate Transparency Act. It's a significant federal encroachment into states' rights. It's the federal government stepping into starting to manage business formation, and they've attached criminal penalties to small business owners, a bunch of things. But it's a significant encroachment and step into an area that's been the state's for over 200 years. To my knowledge, not a single state's done a single thing about it. They just shrug and say, okay, whatever. And it's been really disappointing to me because I feel that the lawsuits that are filed and the fights that are had over federal lands and things, they're important. I'm not saying that they're not, but I think they often miss a lot of the real issues, the ones that focus more on people, the ones where we are more concerned with federal overreach. For example, one of the things that I believe every Utahn should know, at least that I guess utilizes these funds, is with the private school scholarship, or I don't remember what they call it now. It was both names going through, but it's where a homeschooler or a private schooler can get $8,000 per child per year from the government. When we talk about federal encroachment, we often view it as the feds coming in. But it's fascinating to me that here in the state, we had a state bill passed at the state legislature level. And 4 times in that bill that was passed, it is said that someone that took those funds became subject to federal law. And so the state of Utah created a direct link for anyone that takes those funds for homeschooling or private schooling. The recipients of those agree contractually, essentially, to be bound by a federal regulation. And it creates this direct link from the federal government to homeschooling in Utah. And we have issues, the federal government come in and regulates more and regulates more and regulates more. But I'm deeply concerned when our state legislature puts in a direct link to federal regulation for Utahns. In addition, there's another one. There's another one that came down with homeschoolers where under this Corporate Transparency Act, it requires that you report and disclose to FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, all of your beneficial owners of an entity. So an LLC, a corporation, something like that. A beneficial owner is more than just an owner. It's anyone that can even indirectly exercise what they call substantial control over an entity. And it can take in a fair number of people that have to be reported. You have to give your driver's license. You have to provide your date of birth, your address, and you have to keep it updated. And the federal government can use this for law enforcement purposes. They can give it to other countries. So if your group or business speaks out against the war in Israel or something like that, and you travel, and you're registered as a beneficial owner with these businesses, you can be subject to penalty or arrest or whatever as you travel internationally without even knowing that there's anything, for you there. But it's fascinating because that Corporate Transparency Act came out in 2021 is when it was passed. It goes into effect this year. And so this year, when this is going into effect, Utah passes a bill. Again, this is the state level now. And they say, openly, hey, homeschoolers, we know some of you like to get together for co-ops or micro schools or different things. We know sometimes zoning laws get in the way of that. So we'll pass a law that says you can have a co-op or micro school in any zoning area in the state, so long as you register as an entity. And I look at that and I go, this isn't a coincidence that they now offer this protection if you register as an entity, because then you have to report all those that are in charge of your group directly to the federal government. And I say, to me, this is the type of stuff the AG should be very actively alerting Utahns to say, whoa, red flags, there's all kinds of connections here. Federal encroachment is everywhere. And we focus on it with the BLM, shutting down some trails in Moab or doing these different pieces. But I see much more sinister things going on where they're coming in through the Utah legislature even and passing laws.
Why do you think that language was even included by the state legislature for doing that?
I believe the stated reason would be I believe what they would say is, well, because we're using federal funds, we have to have some level of federal oversight type thing. People that take federal funds have to be subject to federal laws type thing. But I look at that and I say, all right, Utah, well, we should be very transparent to people. And we should say openly, these are federal funds. If you're saying they're federal funds, we should say they're federal funds and you're subject to federal regulation. That should be a transparent disclosure. Or we should say, no, we're going to keep our states' rights and we're going to simply do this from state funds. This won't be from federal funds. There is no federal oversight or regulation. And again, that conversation, from what I can tell, isn't had. Those disclosures aren't had. There's no level of discussion or transparency on it because most people don't even know to look for it. But the attorneys in the Attorney General's office, they do. And I believe that they could connect so many dots for us to show us federal overreach at a level that we could clean up as a state. I believe we could clean up so much federal overreach just within our own state by highlighting the transparency, showing what's there and what's going on. So to get to your second question about immigration, the AG, this is something that people often don't love me for, but I say openly, the AG shouldn't be making law, shouldn't be playing politics. We should just enforce the law. And I believe very strongly that the AG's role is to enforce the law, and that when we start politicizing the enforcement of the law, the rule of law breaks down, and I believe that the whole country's foundation starts to crumble. If you can just enforce the law today and not tomorrow because it's politically expedient, it's a whiplash effect, and it starts to create more of a king type mentality to America. So on immigration, I say I will fully enforce the laws, that are there to the extent I can. I don't have a police force to go out and arrest people. The police are at the county, city levels, but I believe we should work very closely with them, make it so they can do their jobs, make it so that there's not roadblocks in place. I'd be actually quite interested to start to look at and really understand what are the roadblocks in place or the impediments in place that prevent the full enforcement of immigration laws. With that being said, I am a big fan of also being very transparent on how broken our immigration laws are. They're incredibly broken. It's a horrible system of law. It's one of the worst systems of law in the United States. And I'd be a huge fan of pushing for real
Do you
reform.
think it's purposely bad?
Yes, I do. Because I believe very strongly both parties gain a lot of power by pointing the finger at the other over immigration. And neither one wants to fix it because it's always a voting cry for them. It's always a rallying cry in an election. They've had many chances to fix it. They refuse to. Even when it's all Democrats or all Republicans that control something, we've had those moments. They refuse to address immigration and fix it. And so I believe we should be very actively calling out all the impediments in place, all the political grandstanding, the different things taking place, to really let people know how we're losing that ability to just enforce the law and have a decent immigration system.
So we basically have less than a minute left. Any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
I just appreciate anyone that takes the time to listen and understand. I'm a big believer that education, knowledge is really empowering. And so I would just encourage each of you to really study the issues, study the candidates. I believe very strongly that the way we vote this election can make a difference. And if we vote, even if you vote for a candidate that doesn't win, it still creates a system of competition. It still creates a system where they see, they listen, it affects how things move in the future. And so I'd say don't be shy about voting for the candidate you feel best about, because it will have an impact. And I believe that very strongly.
Well, I'll tell you this much is the case. I don't have a problem voting for the person that I think will do best for the office. So, Austin
great.
Hepworth, I want to say thank you for joining me today. Appreciate you being here. Where can people go to find out more about you or donate to your campaign?
My website is austinhepworth.com or austinforutah.com, FOR. Both lead to the same place. And so you can go to austinhepworth.com or austinforutah.com.
Well, Austin, once again, thank you for joining me, brother. I appreciate you being here. Have a wonderful week and good luck in the race.
Okay. Thanks so much, John.
Take care, my friend. All right. That was Austin Hepworth running for Attorney General as an independent. And now I have joining me a good friend to the program, Michael Letts of Invest USA. Michael, thank you for joining me today. Appreciate you, brother. Look forward to our conversation that we're going to have. So let me, folks, real quickly reintroduce Michael Letts. Michael Letts is the founder, president, and CEO of Invest USA. Invest USA is a national grassroots nonprofit organization that has helped provide thousands of bulletproof vests to law enforcement and first responders. So Michael Letts, once again, thanks for joining me, brother. Appreciate you being here.
Always a privilege, John. Enjoy being on your show, and thank you for what you're doing to make a true difference in America. You're spreading the truth, and that's all that matters.
Well, okay, quick question for you. Looks like you're not quite yet to Milwaukee, as they say in
No,
Austin Powers.
we're running a
Alice
little
Cooper
bit
said.
behind schedule, but we'll be all right.
When do you plan on getting it up there?
We'll either leave after this interview or possibly leave in the morning. I think we've had probably another 20, 25 interviews done today, and we had about 30 yesterday. So I may go ahead and get a good night's sleep and then head up in the morning.
You deserve a good night's sleep and before you head out. Uh, well, we appreciate you carving out time, especially carving out a whole hour when you've been doing such a momentous schedule. So, folks, uh, please go to his website, Invest USA. That's INVEST USA.com. I appreciate him being here. And now I saw that you sent me something through text. Do you want to share with me what that is? Because I don't really know how to share it without having my producer join me.
No, that's fine. That is what's going to be released to the American public as we help proceed to make sure this country gets cleaned up. You'll find out more information later. I just wanted you to have it first.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Then I'll watch that. And right at the moment, I'm not sure who joined us, but I'm going to guess that's probably my producer joining me. At least I sure hope it is. So, Michael, let's. There were two topics that I wanted to bring you on about. First of all, I wanted to bring on you on, and we spoke yesterday about the uh, assassination attempt. Yes. Hi,
Correct.
Dwayne. How you doing, brother? We spoke about that, and then we also I want to get your thoughts on having JD Vance on. JD Vance is now the vice president, the nominee for not the nominee. He has accepted the nomination, but now is the running for vice president on the Republican ticket underneath Donald Trump as running for president. Which one of those do you want to tackle first?
Well, I will tell you this: the assassination continues to escalate and grow. There are other pieces of information that are coming to light, but we can touch those at any point in time. We can kind of go back and forth because they all tie in together. JD obviously is attraction to the ticket from the standpoint they think he can appeal to what we call blue collar or rust collar workers in some of the key swing states. um, I'm not so sure if I agree with that, but he's got a lot of good positives going.
Really?
He,
Why? In what way would you not agree with that?
Al JD's an attorney. He's obviously, to be on that level, you can't be broke. So, he's, I think, a little over 7 million and some odd change for his declared net worth to this point. And I don't know of too many people that are on the Rust Belt that actually could relate to that. They're not attorneys. They're not, in terms of assets. But let me tell you, he has brings a lot of strength to the ticket as well, and that's what we're excited about.
Okay, so what strengths do you believe he brings to the ticket? Because right now, Van Jones last night said, well, basically almost called him Hitler.
Hmm. I don't know if I would go to that degree. I will tell you this: here's some of the strengths. He brings youth. He's obviously young. He has it's an attractive couple, shall we say, and the old JFK appeal, Camelot appeal, that brings some attraction. And quite frankly, he's got very good conservative views. Now, I will tell you before I let you off the hook with just having said that, there is some concern that he has made statements in the past against Trump or taken positions that were not as conservative as they should be. I do find it interesting that he has apologized for those viewpoints. and move forward. So I think that's a real positive. You don't find too many politicians that are willing to apologize for anything.
Well,
So I will give him the credit for that.
here's what I like that he said. He came out publicly and said, "I was wrong. I was wrong about Trump. I did not think he would. I didn't think he would." His words were, "I didn't think he would be a good president. He has wound up being a great president."
And I'm
And
very encouraged to see that.
so I respect an individual, and that was clear back. I want to say in in 2016, 2017, somewhere in that neighborhood of time. He came out, made public statements. Yes, initially I was not for him, but he has proven me wrong. And frankly, I know a lot of people. In fact, when President Trump initially announced in the Republican when we were meeting as state delegates uh, in 2016, I initially thought I was going to vote for Ted Cruz. So
Right.
when I was meeting for the in the caucus meetings, this wasn't yet for the primary. It hadn't reached the primary level. In fact, it hadn't even met the state convention yet. Initially, I thought I was going to vote for Ted Cruz. By the time the primary came along, I was fully on board the Trump train, and Ted Cruz was a long past memory in my mind. So even Talk with John got it wrong to begin with.
Well, and
So,
there's something very important with what you just said, John. And I have reiterated the same thing that you did. It is very refreshing to find someone who will admit that his choice in the political realm was premature and wrong and apologize for it and say, I'll do better on the next go round. Because we have to all remember there's nobody perfect. Every one of us makes mistakes. And so, that having been said, it's refreshing to find people that are willing to admit it because that doesn't exist very often today, John.
no, it doesn't. So another one of his stance that I'm really favorable about is I really like his position on Ukraine. There is
Okay.
no he goes. There's no real good reason for us to be involved in this war. He wants to see a peaceful end brought very quickly. That's statements that he's made on his own before he was announced as the vice president's candidate.
Yeah, he shares a very strong commitment to making sure that we take care of America's needs first. And that just speaks volumes because what we're doing now is we're taking care of everybody else across the world and ignoring the American crisis and putting our resources in foreign countries when it needs to be right here in good old hometown America because that's where we have the majority of issues that are plaguing the way of life for this great country.
Um, Another thing that I really like about him is the guy is super smart. Um, Graduated from Yale Law School. You can't be a dummy to do that.
Agreed.
Um, and so I'm sure looking forward to a debate between him and Kamala Harris. In fact, he might do a better job. Let's put it: Kamala winds up in the driver's seat, shall we say, instead
Right.
of in the VP chair for whatever reason. Biden was to step down. I think J.D. Vance would do a better job in a debate against Kamala than President Trump would. Why? Because I think J.D. Vance can be a. This is my opinion. What you need a vice president to do is to be willing to take bullets.
Right.
Maybe that's a bad term to use now, but willing to take willing to take the shots, the arrows, shall we say, that are coming towards the president. He needs to be a person that's willing to stand up and deflect and take on himself the heat for the president. And I think JD Vance is going to do a great job. And on top of that, I think he'll be a great attack dog. And that's also what you need in a good vice president is someone that can be a little bit of an attack dog.
What you're going to see in this upcoming presidency, John, is because, I've had this discussion before. Unfortunately, the corruption runs so deep on so many levels. But in this particular section, you need an attack dog, and I'm not saying that will be JD. You need an attack dog that needs to go after the executive branch corruption, the corruption you find at DOJ, the bureau, the agency, et cetera, et cetera. Then you also, if this is going to work, John, and we're going to restore America's greatness, you also got to have an attack dog that has to go after the legislature and call people out for what is really going on. I do believe JD would be a great asset for doing that. Having been there in the Senate, true, he hasn't been there long, but he's been there long enough to know how the system works. And that's one of the great disappointments for the American people is you don't elect statesmen anymore. You elect politicians, and as soon as they get there, they learn the ropes as to how to take care of themselves and their reelection first, and that's what they end up doing. They sell this country down the tubes.
So I would say as of 2-3 months ago, even up, in fact, I've said this in the last couple of weeks, I was hoping Vivek Ramaswamy was going to be the vice presidential pick. I think he would have made a great presidential pick. I think he would have been someone that, just like JD Vance, very intelligent,
Right.
very experienced in business. The other thing that Vivek had is he's a minority, so that could have been helpful. But I find it interesting. So I was really worried. I was super worried that he was going to pick Rubio. For speaking,
Well,
Trump
he
was
was in
going
the
to pick
contention for a while. He
Rubio.
was in the contention.
Rubio. Well, he was one of the three that was supposedly in the final three, and then I was
Right.
also very concerned about him possibly picking the North Dakota governor.
Doug.
What I think this, I wonder if Donald Trump would have picked one of those two pre the assassination attempt. Had there not been an assassination attempt, I wonder if he would have picked Rubio, or because you could have supposedly helped with the minority vote. Now I see Rubio as a little bit of I see Rubio as a rhino. That's my
Right.
personal opinion. But when he picked JD Vance, to me, he was picking someone that if I was on the left, according to Van Jones for the audience is, and I referenced him earlier, basically Van Jones called JD Vance Hitler, said he was worse than Donald Trump. When Van Jones said that, what it showed to me is the bottom line is the Democrats want JD Vance and what he said was JD Vance is worse than Donald Trump. So what that says to me is we want JD Vance less than we want Donald Trump. And meaning Donald Trump, in my opinion, just picked a good insurance policy. And that's why I wanted probably the number one or number two reason why I wanted JD or Vivek Ramaswamy picked is because I don't see the deep state trying to take out Donald Trump when the pick is going to be one of those two type of individuals. So that's why I'm really glad for JD Vance.
Oh, well, I understand and agree. You want the most conservative you can, so that gives less opportunity for them to want to take out the president. But I would remind folks, and you and I have had this discussion talking about the assassination attempt, that it's not over yet. Fat Lady hasn't sung, as far as I'm concerned, and you still have months before the election. They failed this last time, but quite frankly, you have to understand that it's the deep state doing this. People say, what does the deep state actually mean? Let me reverse the question. I don't think anybody listening to you and I tonight, John, truly believes that Joe Biden is calling the shots and hasn't been calling them for quite some time. So it is a.
Listening to us, they better not. They're listening to us. But even the Joe Average Q Democrat, that
Right.
was if that wasn't revealed to you that there's no way that Joe Biden is calling the shots when in the debate and in the two interviews since, then you're a complete moron and a complete buffoon, and your intelligence level is probably even lower than Joe Biden's.
You hit the nail right on the head. So what happened? Well, when Joe Biden was first elected, they could count on Joe to basically carry their water any way they wanted it carried. Then, of course, Jill and Hunter began to get more and more attuned with the office of the presidency. They did it for different reasons. Jill enjoyed the power and the wealth that came with it. Hunter's very existence depends on it because of what he's facing in upcoming trials on that presidential pardon. So they began to use their persuasive power, shall we say, to convince Dad, Joe, to begin to buck them. You notice he's done that more and more. Even though he is severely mentally decapacitated, he has sometimes gotten ornery and said, I'm not stepping down. I'm going to continue to run, period. That's not what the deep state wants on that particular level. They want something they can control to make sure they get their way and their agenda. So he's now become a liability. You've seen that where they have more and more begin to distance themselves. They were hoping he would kind of do himself in with the debate, etc. That doesn't seem to have been the case now. Now they're kind of basically stuck with Joe saying, I'm sticking in the race. Even if I lose, I'm staying. So you have two trends of thought. Are they just going to go ahead and write this one off, realize that he's not going to win in November? It's going to be lost by a landslide. Trump's going to come in by a landslide. And don't spend any more assets and don't waste any new talent on this particular election cycle. Wait for 4 years. Or are they going to find a way to get Joe stepped aside? Now, you remember, he says he's not stepping aside. The only way that would happen is if he were not physically he weren't alive, or physically he had such a medical condition come on him that he could not function at all. And that's not out of the realm of possibility. You've seen they've been willing to do anything to stay in power. And of course, the flip side is you don't want to give it over to Trump either. So they were trying to eliminate him. Failed this time, but just because they failed doesn't mean that they're giving up and are not willing to try again.
Well, let's. I kind of want to pivot now to the assassination attempt.
Well, I would agree.
This is kind of my overall take. I think some things changed when that assassination attempt failed, and I think it was providential. I think it was the hand of God that stopped that from happening. Why President? And let me be clear on this. I believe President Trump was spared, not necessarily because President Trump was such a righteous man. I think he was spared for some of the righteous and God giving the United States one more chance to correct its ways.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly, John. I think it's very clear from a biblical perspective. You go back in the Old Testament and look at some of the people God used to save the Israel, and et cetera, et cetera. And I can't find any of them that really had a whole lot better character than Donald Trump did at times,
Uh, David would probably King David would probably have some of the same foibles, shall we say?
Moses, Abraham, they all had their quirks. So, quite frankly, I love the statement that you just made. God didn't spare somebody because of that particular person. He spared somebody because of his overall plan on what to do with God's people who are asking for an intervention for their country. And I firmly believe that.
So I'm going to read to the audience. I've already read this to you on my show yesterday, but I want to reread these statements that I made when, like, moments after the assassination attempt. I pulled it up within less than 10 minutes. I pulled up and seen it and started sending a couple tweets out. First tweet was tough as nails. Trump just won the presidency. The next statement I did, wow, how crazy. Trump just fight. And I still haven't corrected that because I'm going to leave it out there. Talk with John makes mistakes. Hopefully, everybody understand. Wow, that was crazy. Trump just said, "Fight, fight, fight." At
Right.
least it looked like he mouthed it, and
He
then now
did.
it's been confirmed. It's been confirmed. But
It's been
I was
confirmed.
watching that, on the news, and they had not confirmed that yet. The next one I did, and this one I put a little thought into, but it probably was within still that first half hour to 45 minutes. This was what I said. I pray for peace in our nation. May the Lord be with the families who lost loved ones. And let me be very clear. Well, I'll finish this and then I'll come back to the slight clarification on what I mean by that. Trump just won the election. ABC News confirms that the district attorney told them the shooter is dead and one other confirmed casualty is in the crowd and possibly one more. And then something I noticed and this is another text, something I noticed in the very first interviews, even before the beard guy and some of the beard guys talked about the actual shooter, they were getting the people who had been part of just in the stands.
Right.
Something that I noticed. So I'm going to read this text. Something I noticed in the very first interviews. Many mentioned within moments they started to pray. So grateful that they turned to our Father above. So in the first moments, when the shooting, they still don't know if it's going to start happening and more shots are going to be fired. They said they started praying.
Correct.
That is many of the Republican Party. And I consider myself a Christian conservative who happens to, in general, vote Republican and be a member of the Republican Party.
I think most do.
I consider myself Christian first, conservative second, and then Republican. And so I want to go back to, we prayed in our family for the family of this shooter. We prayed for his family. We prayed for President. I'm going to call him president. He's the occupier of the White House. I've said this many times, but I'm going to call him president. I'm using his official title right now. I prayed for President Biden's health and safety as well as Kamala Harris's health and safety. I am so grateful that they are still alive. I don't want to see a hair on their head harmed. Let's get them out and then let's take care of them legally. But the bottom line is, I am grateful that President Trump's life was spared. So we have the opportunity, because who knows what would be happening at the convention right now had that bullet been over 2 inches further. He
Well, they
would
were
have.
hoping, John, that they would take him out, that the conservative movement would rise up because of it, and then, quite frankly, I'm sure they would facilitate taking out the current occupant at the White House. And then they would hope we would devolve into a civil war between the two groups, the two factions, be able to invoke martial law, and they'd be there for a long time to come.
So, as of that failed assassination attempt, I also think part of the deep state's plan was, okay, we're going to get rid of Trump first, and then to your point, we're going to find a way to get rid of Biden, probably another assassination was my guess, how they intended on getting rid of him, whether that be through poisoning or some other means. But my guess is most likely they were going to find some guy that could be a Trump supporter that would actually wind up doing the assassination. That was my. I look forward to us getting on the other side, in 100 years from now or 300 years from now, after Christ comes and the history of the world is revealed. I guarantee you that's what they had in motion. As of that failed attempt, I think they go, we're going to ride Biden. Trump just won the presidency unless they wind up taking him out. But JD Vance is that good insurance policy that makes them go, maybe we don't want to do that.
You have a great point, because if something were to happen to the president, even though he may not be your first choice, talk about JD Vance, I do believe the conservative movement would rally behind him just to make the point that you cannot kill the conservative movement itself.
Well, my understanding is now if there was an assassination, JD Vance takes the presidential spot,
That would be correct.
even pre-election, and it's just kind of like formally done, um, even pre-election, and so that's kind of
He
my
would
thought.
be, yeah, he would be the nominee. Um, and my point to the deep state is, while the enthusiasm may be generated by Trump, there would be an awful lot of people who would feel that they would owe that to his legacy to continue their enthusiasm to restore principles into this country. And they would, if they didn't really like him, they would get behind JD anyway,
Yeah.
just to make sure that the point was made very loud and clear that you cannot destroy the movement itself.
Okay, so let's talk to the almost within hours they were starting to say, well, we're sure there's going to be a bunch of conspiracy theorists saying that this was staged. Um, George Stephanopoulos, George Little Midget Guy with ABC Mornings,
Right.
was blaming this on Republicans. He had someone come on and say, they've raised the temperature too much. Donald Trump raised the temperature too much, and no, it's the Democrat mainstream media and the Democrats that called him Hitler.
That's correct. It's always the hit dog that yelps. And quite frankly, we expected them to say that. Everything is always the Republican conservative movement's fault. Even if the fact that it was sunny today, it's our fault. If it's raining tomorrow, it's our fault. So you expected that to occur. The problem is that the facts just don't substantiate that. As you pointed out, first of all, ever since when Trump was elected, what was Maxine Waters and the rest of the liberal movement's main announcements and thrusts? You confront them, you tell them they're not welcome, you get up in their face, you do everything you can to push back on them, and
Right.
that has been their mantra and their theme ever since Trump was elected. And they continue to do that. Again, they are probably the greatest experts at deception and lying of any party I've ever seen, especially this administration. And so they're not going to change, do anything differently. That is exactly what they would have done, and they're still continuing to do it, John.
Okay, so let's dive down in the assassination, how it happened. Um, so uh, we are told that the rifle shot was taken somewhere in the neighborhood of about 150 yards. That's about 350 feet. The
Yeah,
guy had a scope. Supposedly, this was a 20-year-old who was a Republican, registered Republican. Now, it seems to be quite obvious with the background check that they are doing that he happened to be a registered Republican, so he could not vote for Donald Trump. And then on top of that, when he was 17, he gave to a Democrat uh, organization, and it was Blue something or other. I can't remember the exact name of the organization he gave to, but it's basically a Democrat Party organization he donated money to. Um, so fortunately, he wasn't a great shot, but we know there's a lot of video footage of people saying there's a shooter up on the roof trying to get the police to pay attention to him.
correct.
So, do you want to start breaking it down?
Sure, and I'll give
Point
the
by
most
point?
recent. I will give the most recent updates again, as we did earlier on your other show. Is let's quickly let the audience know the infrastructure, what they had to work with, and then how they played it out. You understand that the president at that time did not have a presidential package for security. That is only the incumbent president and the vice president and the first lady. And or if you happen to have the nomination, you're coming into an election cycle and you have the nomination of a major party, would you get that kind of protection? You remember Trump was not the nominee till yesterday. So on Saturday, he did not have that. You also need to bear in mind that there are two other people in the state, Kamala Harris and Jill Biden out campaigning. And so the assets were spread very, very thin to be able to accommodate all that. Now, what is the difference between a presidential package and just a former presidential detail? Presidential package, you have whatever assets are necessary, however many people you need, and you also have access to whatever technology you need. What do I mean by technology? Drones, helicopters, you name it, you think it's necessary, you got it. Now, the former president has a very limited number of agents, and they do not have the same access to technology. You notice you didn't see any drones or helicopters there yesterday. I mean, on Saturday, and that's typical. But I will tell you this: because Trump is such a quote unquote controversial figure, and there have been so many threats on his life, very credible threats. I will tell you this: we had credible threats last week alone from Iran that he was the target of an assassination attempt. Have not determined yet whether this was part of that or not, but those were credible. And so, because of that, his team, not the team you saw with Saturday. Interesting. I'm just giving you folks some things to think through. Interesting. His normal team was given the day off. So the people that you saw protecting the president were a new team. Obviously, they weren't. I wouldn't even give them a B rating. They weren't an A rating for sure. You
That
probably
was
give
like
them a
the
C
C or D team.
rating.
That
Yep.
was that wasn't the varsity team. It wasn't the JV team. It wasn't the sophomore team. It was the freshman team that was out there.
You're exactly right, John. And so that was the team that he had. Now, what do they do when they're low on assets, shall we say? Well, what they make up for it this way is they get local and state law enforcement to help fill in the gaps. What are some of the gaps that need to be filled in? Well, you have what we call CAs, which are counter snipers. And oftentimes, the members of city or state SWAT teams will then go in and fill those roles to help make sure that the proper protection is covered and they have everything that they need. But so that's what you saw. That was the layout. Now let's go into the actual the event itself real briefly. You go in 2 days before the advance team. Team showed up, did its assessment, decided that the barn, and what am I saying by barns? From a Secret Service standpoint, we don't call them buildings, we call them barns. By the barn with the greatest ability for a threat was the one the actual shooter was encountered upon. Now, what do we typically do with the most uh, deepest threats, the deepest barns that are a threat? Typically, you place agents on top of those to make sure they're secured at all times. This particular case, that did not happen. They said they didn't think it was necessary. Now they've changed their position, at least according to the director of the Secret Service, Miss Kimberly. They're saying now that the Secret Service didn't have enough assets and they gave that barn to local law enforcement. Local law enforcement is disputing that. They're saying no, they were never told they were assigned that protection. Another thing that makes it a little odd is the Secret Service CA teams. There were some CA teams there from the Secret Service. They were using that as a command post on the inside. So they were actually inside the building while he was on the roof. Understand now that's a steel roof, metal roof. You ever walked on a steel roof, John?
Yes,
You
I
know what it's
have,
like
and
being
there
able to
is
hear it
a
when you're in the
lot of
building?
noise.
Pretty obvious. So you have an issue to begin with that nobody's on the roof. Now we go 2 days forward to the event itself. The event is opened up. People are allowed into the main staging area. That becomes full. They close that, and then they have what you call the outer perimeter security, which you still have a combination of Secret Service and local law enforcement and state law enforcement out there. Upon the time that the event was to start, and by the way, the event was to start at 5. It didn't get going till 6. Nobody has accounted for why there was a delay there yet, but once the event was getting started at 6 p.m., is then the assailant gets out of his car in the outer perimeter parking lot and begins to walk toward the building to which there is a ladder attached and that he said was brought in there the day before, and begins to move towards getting to the top of the roof. Now, while he's doing that, there are plenty of civilians and constituents that are in that outer perimeter parking lot. They see this because he's got a assault rifle strapped over his shoulder and back, and they begin to holler out to the agents that are in the outer perimeter, the Secret Service and police. There's a guy with a gun, guy with a gun. Now we know because there is video cameras all around and audio that we caught on video a Secret Service agent and a local law enforcement officer turning, looking in that direction, but yet they don't do anything. The problem that you have, John, is he was also listed on the list of suspicious people that were under surveillance that had possibly could be at the event and cause particular issue because of some of the videos he had posted prior. Very threatening, very stupid. He acted like he was a middle basket case. So they already knew who he was. They knew to be on the lookout for him. Why they didn't move forward becomes another red flag. Then also, nobody called into the communication. Anytime you're there, because you remember I served as an asset to the Secret Service during my career as well. And anytime you see a gun, even if you perceive it to be a gun, you're not sure. You are to immediately call into the communications, use the code word gun. Upon the issuance of the word gun, the Secret Service team assigned to the protection of the president immediately moves in, encircles him for protection. He escorts him out, gets him out of the vicinity. Doesn't just take him off the stage and put him behind the stage. They get him out, put him in a vehicle, and they're gone. Boom. It's done. It's over. Nobody called into communications that there was a gun. So now he begins to crawl up, climb up. He gets on the roof. Now this was 27 minutes is when all this started before the shooting. Okay, so we know he's there 27 minutes before anything happens. Now he's gotten up onto the roof. He begins to crawl around. He's about 7 minutes, 8 minutes on the roof, crawling around, trying to position himself. So obvious that now spectators on the interior begin to see him, and they begin to holler out the same thing. Hey, there's a guy with a gun on the roof, and they holler out to the law enforcement and Secret Service there. Once again, they do the same thing they did before. You can tell them on camera. They look, but they don't react. The people react. Isn't that funny? The people, the spectators, know this
We're
is not going
going
to turn
nuts.
out well,
They
so
were
they begin to
going
run away
nuts.
from the area. After that occurs, the president then begins to move forward to speak at the podium. We have two CAs. Now, these CAs are local law enforcement. They are not Secret Service agents because you remember I just explained how we had to kind of spread it out because you don't have as much help as you need to. You have two local law enforcement agents as CAs that are counter snipers. One we call front, one we call a rear positional. The front positional sees what's going on the roof. He takes, lines up a shot. Now, understand, he's got a scope that can probably see the nose hairs on this guy, okay? So he knows whether he's guy's got a stick and he's trying to point it or whether he's a real threat. He deems it to be a real threat. He radios in, he calls in. He says, I have a threat to the president, gun, and permission to engage. He gets no response. And quite frankly, after 43 seconds is what the clock shows, and 43 seconds out, about 40 seconds into this, 38 seconds, the shooter begins to shoot. He gets off 3 rounds before the CA is given permission to engage. He does so and, of course, takes him out immediately. But those 3 shots grazed the president, killed the Corey, which was the firefighter behind him, and injured 2 other participants in critical condition. So that is what you have. And then, of course, right after that, you'll notice the other, I'm giving you points of concern. You notice that it takes about 3 seconds for the agents to get the president down. In fact, the president had already gone down on his own.
Right.
That's highly unusual. Typically, when somebody is hit, the security detail are so close by, they're the ones that drop him to cover, to protect him. He was already down before the agents got there to surround him. One of the things you notice when the agents are surrounding him is on this B team, C team, whatever you want to call it, you have 3 females. Now, I'm not in any way disparaging females. They do a great job. The problem is that these females are about 1.5 feet short of the president. So they do not have the ability to block the way they should have. So the president is left exposed One of the females on the rear side doesn't even engage to block her area. She's so confused. You can hear her on the audio. Hey guys, what's going on? What do we do? What do we do? Where do we go? And so another male agent has to step in. They then pause for a moment, determine that it is safe. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Determine that it's clear enough to safe to move him. They move him to the vehicle. Of course, you again see the female agents fumbling. Some of them can't even holster their weapon, but they get him out and move on. Now, that is what it is as of today. You can see there are so many protocol violations. Why was gun never called? Why was the permission to engage not given? Why was there even a necessity for the permission to engage? That's typically very rare. When you're in such a situation, John, if you
Okay.
see a threat to the president, you eliminate it. Now, there has been a rationale given for that. I'll let your listeners know they can make their own determination. Because they were not Secret Service agents, but they were local or state law enforcement, the decision was made before anybody does anything, you have to get clearance from the supervisory Secret Service agent in charge of the event before anything is done. That's I hear what they're saying, but I've never seen that happen before.
Okay. So
So
here's the
it
question
was
for you.
very unusual, very different. The other thing, John, that has come out of this afternoon, there is now a number of witnesses that say there perhaps may have been a second shooter at the water tower. And there was fire power that was directed that way as well. That is being investigated as we speak. But then somebody told me who's investigating. If it's the FBI, these are
Right.
the same people that did the Russian dossier, Mar-a-Lago, and others. You can't trust a word they say. So is it really meaningful that they're investigating a second shooter? I think it's meaningful that there could have been, that the issue's been raised of a second shooter. But you can see, even if you discount what we just talked about, how do you answer, John, the question of a delay to engage? How do you answer when there's obvious that there is a weapon involved? So obvious, 27 minutes before he even got to the podium, and yet nothing was done, and the code word was never used. These are some going to be some wild explanations, John. I'm not sure how you can parlay that into something that the American public will believe.
Okay. So one of the questions that I have for you, because I've heard this reported on multiple media sources
Are
by
you
multiple
there,
media.
John?
You can't hear me?
I think we lost you, John.
I can hear you.
Hello?
Here's the problem. I can hear you, uh, and I'm typing. I can hear
Looks like I'm
you.
froze. I don't know.
Well, it's too bad I don't have my producer helping me out.
I noticed that the picture wouldn't change it.
Reconnecting.
Hey, John, you there?
Can you hear me? I'm
I
here.
can. Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know what happened, but I don't know where you got cut off. But you just tell me where we go from here.
You know what? You, for whatever reason, on your end, you couldn't hear me. I heard everything you said right up
Right.
until you left. So when I raised my finger, you could see that I was trying to ask a question. So here's my question. I've heard on a number of media sources say that that the Secret Service has a standing policy that they are not supposed to shoot before a shot is fired. That's what I've heard by
Yeah.
multiple sources in the media, and the reason giving is nobody wants to have a mess up and shoot the wrong and shoot someone when they shouldn't. That's been stated by multiple media sources, and so I wanted to get your thoughts on that one.
Well, let's work our way backwards, John. First of all, the climate has changed in all the years I've been around, okay? In the old days, there was a threat, you eliminated it. End of discussion. I don't have to ask your permission. We do it. We do what our job is, and that's to protect the president. Nowadays, because there's such a disdain for law enforcement, because you make a wrong decision, you could end not just your career, you end your financial stability because you're having to pay for your defense, and you could possibly be found guilty, and you could be the one behind bars. So yes, there is concern about taking a step in your own hands. That's probably why they suggested that you get permission from the senior agent to engage first. However, for it to be a standing order, no, sir. That's like me telling you, John, protect the president. But if you see somebody, and this is what just happened, you see somebody fixing a shooting, but for some reason I can't respond to you and give you permission, you just stand there and watch. You can't do your job. Doesn't work that way.
Okay. Another thought. One of the other questions has been, I've got some of my conservative friends that are ultra uh, conspiratorious. I consider myself. I believe conspiracy theories happen all the time, but they even have gone further that they think Donald Trump may have been in on this. And
No,
my counter to that is, you don't we know that three people were injured, one was killed, right? We know that a bullet whizzed by uh, President Trump's ear. At least that's what we were told. I'm willing to even accept that someone could say, hey, they did the old professional wrestling, used a blood pack, hit it on their ear, and oh, I'm bleeding all of a sudden. I could almost buy that. But we have someone in the stands that was killed and two other individuals that were hit. My point
you
from that is, Donald Trump, even if he was in on this with Biden, there's no way that he would want someone to take a shot at him and get that close, because 1 to 2 inches, Donald Trump's dead.
right.
Or
Well,
at the very least, he is seriously injured and in the hospital right now.
you are correct, and instead of 1 or 2 inches, you're talking 1 or 2 millimeters. Would have made the difference of life and death for him. And quite frankly, I think we need to capitalize on what you just said. First of all, the video, when you slow pause it, you can see the wind or the trajectory of the bullet itself. You can't actually see the bullet, but you can see the ripples of the air as it passes by and comes out of the earlobe and continues traveling. So here's the issue. That wasn't a fake bullet. That wasn't a paintball. That was the real thing. Plus, as you said, it passed through him and hit a volunteer firefighter, who tragically, when he heard the first shot, jumped over and shielded his wife and his daughter. And good thing he did. He took the bullet for them, or one of them would have been dead instead. He was truly an American hero.
True,
He gave his
true
life.
hero, true hero.
True hero. So, and knowing Trump like I do, he would never allow anybody to be injured or hurt for a fake prank to increase his standing in a poll or do something along those lines. That's just not who he is.
Okay. Um, Thank you for sharing that with us. So then we get to the end. So one of the other things is like, well, the guy shot. He wasn't captured. I'm like, you shoot a firearm at the president of the United States, you're gonna get killed.
Correct.
Those guys don't miss.
Yeah.
The big question is, uh, so as you shared with us, that was not a Secret Service detail that was in that was in counter sniping. It was It was local law enforcement, correct?
It was a local SWAT team, which, hey, obviously they know what they're doing because it only took one round and bullseye. They hit it, and eliminated the threat immediately. But I do have people say, well, why did they eliminate the threat? They just destroyed the evidence of, being able to get more intelligence. Did they do that because they were intentionally trying to cover up? That is an objective or subjective statement, because there's two different sides. Yeah, you could say they put him down immediately so nobody could find anything else further about what was going on. But at the same time, when you're talking about a threat to the president and he's already shot a head shot, you don't want to graze and wound him and have him the ability to take a second. That is what you're trained to do, and that is eliminate the threat.
Yes, yes. Well, Michael, let's kind of we've got about 8 minutes left in our program tonight. along with thanking you for even being here and taking the time and walking us through this. Heaven knows you've done
Mhm.
over 50 interviews, so I want to say thank you for sharing with us. I spoke with David Pine earlier today from the convention center, and he's happy to meet with you if you're
Great.
able to make that happen. Um, but I wanted to, you know, I'm truly grateful that President Trump, once again, his life was spared. What would our world be like today? Would we have someone lose his mind and go after the left? I sure hope not. But I
Well,
think that may have been what they were trying to make happen, and they still make happen.
they're gonna try. I don't think it's over with, John. I think there'll be more attempts. But I think as long as you recognize that and let's not play into their hands. But quite frankly, John, had that occurred, I do believe they would have been successful. I do believe it would have gone all out into a defense of the conservative movement, and it would have gone into a civil war situation, and this country would have been extremely vulnerable. I wanted to make sure the American people, your audience, understand. I get if you're angry and you want to go out and fight, but understand that the world is a hotbed at the moment. And if global leaders see that we are divided and fighting in the streets against each other, that is the perfect time for them to stage a coup and take over our government and destroy what's left of this country. Please don't give them the opportunity to do that.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so you've spoken with you've told me off air that you've spoken with the president. You
Correct.
you said and you've also shared with me his belief, his spiritual beliefs have changed a little bit since the shot, the assassination attempt. Do you want to share anything along those lines?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Obviously, we've talked beforehand, and to which we mentioned that, there were
Beforehand,
possible before
meaning
the incident occurred, and we mentioned that there were the possibility. But I think the greatest thing I can share, John, is, and of course this is videotape. Yesterday, when he went on the convention floor that evening, and he was introduced, and he walks down the hallway, and he is walking into the audience. If you look at that Donald Trump in the face, and you look at previously Donald Trump's, you'll see a distinct change. And what will you see? You will see a man walking in the hallway almost with misty eyes because of the fact that he realizes what was at stake. His life was spared, and just how deeply, not only does he love this country, but how deeply the American people love him. And let me tell you what that does, John. That's very humbling when you begin to think about that. And I think what you will see is much more of a humility and much more of a, we got to make this work for all of Americans. We got to do the right thing. Now, there's some things, John, you can't compromise on. We have talked about that on your show quite often. He is not a revenge president. He is not trying to be a punishing president, but there has to be accountability. You cannot allow people to violate the law, to put America at risk, its citizens at risk, and not be held accountable for their actions. But I think what you're going to see differently now is he's also extremely now aware of how precious life is, and precious life for all Americans, and wanting to make sure that we do what's best for all of our children, for all of our grandchildren, for the future of this country ahead. And God bless him, because it's going to be a really wonderful experience, I believe, as he tries to make sure all of America remains free and with liberty and justice for all.
so you said that you think that there may still be attempts on his life. What is your greatest concerns?
My greatest concern is what we do when I said that there may still be attempts. What I mean by that is they did not succeed. Obviously, there would have been a lot of consequences had they done so. They are not getting their way on the other side of the aisle. You remember they were wanting a president that they could use his administration to accomplish their means. They got that for they're getting off to try to find something else, somebody else, and they're not going to give up. That's what I want the American people to understand. This is truly an epic battle between good and evil. And evil doesn't tuck its tail and run. Evil will fight until there's no fight left. And so we have to keep that in mind. If it's not another attempt, there'll be something else. So let's just remain vigilant and let's make sure that we as Americans understand this. One of the greatest tools of evil that prevails is to cause people to react out of emotion instead of out of prayer and out of common sense and clear thinking. So, whatever occurs in the days ahead, make sure you keep your head on and make sure that you are doing the right thing. It's never right to do wrong, John, period. It's just not. And so make sure that we are abiding by the principles and values that we want this country to be able to shine forth again, and don't violate them yourself. Together, united, shoulder to shoulder, especially backing our thin blue line and those who are going to be put into place to make sure that justice prevails and people are held accountable. Together, we will succeed and see the great things that God has in store for this country. But if we're divided, we will fall. So united we stand. Let's make sure we keep that in mind in the days ahead.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate that. Absolutely. Amen to that statement. Well, pretty much we've come up to the end of it, folks. Michael Letts with Invest USA has joined us. We appreciate him being here. He's had a long 2 days. Hopefully he gets to sleep fast and gets a good night's rest so he can head up to the convention because, boy, you've got a significant drive. In fact,
Fortunately, we won't drive. We'll fly.
Okay, good. I'm like, isn't that a multiple day drive?
I'm not quite as young as I used to be, John. I don't want your audience to think I'm old, but I'm not quite as young as I used to be.
All right, my friend. Be safe. Take care. God bless you. Folks, go to investusa.org. That's INVEST USA, and take a look at his organization and give him a donation. So God bless you, brother. Thank you for being here. Any last words you want to say before you take off?
Yes, let me just say this one thing. John, you have been there with us over the past few years, proclaiming the truth. The time of harvest is coming. I look forward to joining with you and all Americans as we celebrate blessed days that are coming ahead. God bless you. God bless America. Keep up the good work. Keep up telling the truth. We'll see you on the other side.
Take care, my friend. God bless. See ya. All right, folks. This has been Talk with John. We look forward to seeing you next week. It's been a crazy afternoon, and we appreciate both Austin Hepworth as well as Michael Letts for joining us. God bless you all, and we're going to call it a night. Take care, folks. God bless.